From Canada, Citizens Forum, where we look at the important issues of the day through a lens of democracy and media and try to figure out, how do we build a better country for ourselves? Hello, welcome to From Canada Citizens Forum. It is Sunday, September the 7th, 2025. This is called, Who Do Our Governments Work For? And here's the question. In Canada, do our governments work for us, the people of Canada, or do our governments work for big business and the 1%? This is a topic that is seldom talked about in Canada, but it's really one of the most important questions of all. And of course, that's why it's never talked about. Who do our governments really work for? The official story, the story we're told all of our lives, from the day we're born until the day we die, is that, of course, our politicians and our governments work for us. We hear that from all of our politicians all of the time. They always tell us they work for us. And we hear the same story from all of Canada's corporate-owned media, from CBC and CTV to the Globe and Mail, all the radio stations, CNN, Fox. The question, it's just never questioned. The story always is that, of course, our politicians and our governments work for us. Our governments may not succeed in building a better country for us, but of course, they're always trying their best and doing their best for us, for the people. But what if all of that is a lie? What if our governments and politicians don't work for us? What if our politicians and our governments really work for big business and the 0.01%? Now, to some, that may sound crazy, or it may sound like a giant conspiracy theory, but I've been looking into this for about 25 years now, and I think that at least one can make a very good case that really our politicians and governments don't work for us, but instead they work for corporate Canada and they work for the 1%. Here's two examples. First, let's look at the issue of genetically modified foods. I Googled GMO foods, and AI Overview told me that over the past 2 decades, polls have consistently shown that a significant majority of Canadians, typically over 80%, want mandatory labeling for genetically modified foods. AI Overview said that Canadians cite various reasons for this desire to have GMO foods labeled, including health, environmental, and ethical concerns, as well as a fundamental wish to have transparency about the foods that we consume. So here's a case where for many years, the polls say that 80% of Canadians want GMO foods labeled, but it doesn't happen in what is supposed to be a democratic country. And meanwhile, the companies that make GMO foods do not want them labeled. And in Canada, GMO foods do not have to be labeled. Why not? I think it's because what we Canadians want is completely irrelevant. Our governments and politicians, who always pretend to work for us, don't give a damn about what we think or about what we want. And the issue is never even talked about anymore. The politicians never talk about GMO foods. Health Canada never talks about GMO foods. Our public health officials, who are supposed to be watching over our health, never talk about protecting us from GMOs. And the media never talks about it. And if anyone does mention GMO foods, it's only to tell us that they are completely safe, which is the official corporate story. And to me, this shows who's really in charge and who really runs things. It shows that the public is completely and totally irrelevant on this issue, which is a very important public health issue. because there is a lot of evidence that GMO foods are unhealthy and dangerous to eat. Although if you Google GMO foods, you're not going to find that information for a long time. And instead, our governments, as usual, put corporate profits ahead of our health. So GMO foods do not have to be labeled in Canada, even though more than 80% of us want that to happen. But GMO foods are labeled in places like the European Union, and I think in China, and in Australia, and in Russia, and Brazil, and etc. So some countries do label it, but even that never gets talked about. And that to me is an example of who our governments really work for. Let's look at another example, taxes. I am definitely no expert on taxation, but I do know that since the 1970s, taxes on big business and the rich have gone down a lot, while lower income earners are paying more in taxes to make up the difference. And again, this is something that benefits the richer at the expense of the poorer. Did we vote for that? Did we vote to reduce taxes on big business and the rich while increasing them on lower income Canadians? Did we ever vote to cut taxes on the banks and big oil so they could make more money while the rest of us have less? I don't think we ever voted for that, but our politicians and our governments did it anyways. They did it to us. So who do they work for? And this is true on many important issues. We have a housing nightmare in Canada for millions of people precisely because our politicians and governments put bank profits and investor profits and housing industry profits ahead of reasonably priced homes for Canadians. Our governments participated in causing the housing disaster because the high rents and high mortgages that so many Canadians pay ensure a steady flow of money from the poorer to the richer. And that's why we have a housing crisis in Canada. It's a transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. And that's what our governments did. They did that to us. And that's how our governments work. And that's why I say that they do not work for us. So we should always keep this question in mind. Who do our governments work for? And even more importantly, we should be asking, how do we fix this mess up? Because if our governments don't work for us, but instead work for the 1%, then we have got to deal with that problem. And the first step in dealing with it is to understand it and think about it and spend time on it. So let's think more about getting more citizen control of our governments. And let's think more about getting more real democracy into Canada. Let's try and build a Canada where our politicians and governments start doing what the public wants. I think if we do that, we're going to have a better country for the vast majority of us. I want a Canada where the 99% have a much bigger voice in our government and the 1% have a much smaller voice in our governments. I want the kind of country that benefits we, the people, more and benefits the 1% less. I am really sick and tired of living in a Canada where the 1% get what they want and the rest of us are totally irrelevant. And by the way, that's why half of us will now get cancer at some point in our lives, because big business is allowed to poison our food, our air, our water, and they're allowed to poison us so they can make more money. So let's start to fix things up. And the way to do it is to build a more democratic nation for ourselves, a nation where we, the people, have more control and they, the 1%, have less control. And we can build that kind of Canada. How to do it? Please stay tuned.